this day at the Rondo Library, SIGSTS.
Hey everybody, my name is Tamara Hill. I'm with the Center for Victims of Torture, and we, along with some of our community partners, organize an Advocacy Accelerator event. This is an opportunity to bring together our community, those of us that are passionate about making change, and those of us that have the formalized education to make it happen, and just sharing knowledge, sharing community, and figuring out how we can make our Minnesota communities better, safer, and work for everybody. So thank y'all so much. You can find us at cbt.org or message me at thill@cbt.org. Thank you.
Yeah, it's all good. IGSTS.
And we appreciate y'all's patience. I was going to say this is my program at CBT's first event, and we had a really big interest in having a hybrid event so people could come. We have 20-ish people who are registered from around the country today to attend virtually, and so we felt like it was important to try to make it happen. It will not be perfect, but we are imperfect humans, and that's what makes it great. So I hope you'll be patient with us, and thanks for showing up today. A couple of things to note before we get started. One, welcome. Your voice is very welcome here. You're welcome here, and I hope you feel comfortable here today. If there's anything that I or any of our organizers can do to help with that, to make you feel more comfortable, to answer questions, please let us know. All of the organizers have on these little sunflowers, so you'll be able to identify us if you need anything. And yes, these things that I left on the table, one of them says Linktree. It's a QR code. Many people might know. For those that don't know, you can scan a QR code with your phone or your camera, and a Linktree will take you to a page that has a bunch of different links on it. I've included on there, I think, every single link you might need for today. It includes a document that has a list of our speakers and workshops for biographies and everything you might need to know. It has different resources that you might need, websites, etc. So please look on there, but you might need any information for workshops, you need the schedule or anything else. Yeah, and then lastly, I wanted to say, just like as, you know, a community coming in together today, there are a lot of people here from a lot of different walks of life, and hopefully we're all unified in the fact that we care about our communities and we're here to learn more about how to make change happen in them. And with that being said, please be mindful that everyone has their own voice, everyone has their own story, and we're here today to uplift and empower each other. And so if there's differences of opinions or experiences, please be respectful to each other, and also let us know if there's any conversations that are happening in small groups or breakouts that worry you in any capacity. And yes, I think I'd like to just take 1 second for the co-organizers. Yes, and Dr. Raj is, I can't speak highly enough of Dr. Raj, so I won't, because he doesn't like that. But he's going to lead us today in some welcoming and some grounding, and get us started as a community before we head into some learning. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you around all day. So
we'll give her the napkin rose.
Oh, thank you. This is so sweet.
Oh God. Wow. Everybody stand up, come on. Come on. Jump up and down. No, just move. Let your system move. Yeah, dance. Come on, everybody. Put your hands up to the ceiling. Right, breathe. Take a deep breath in. Breathe in and breathe out. Gently breathe in and breathe out. And start to conversate with your body. Right? Start to talk to your body. Come on. How's your body feeling? Right? Get out of your headspace. Right? Less intellectual masturbation and more engagement. Right? Let's engage our body. How are we feeling? How are we showing up in this space? So as you breathe in and breathe out, gently want to invite you to close your eyes and start to focus, right? Start to focus on yourself and the values that you are bringing into this space. What are those values you're bringing into this space? What are your hopes and dreams for this gathering? Right? Reconnect with those values, those hopes, those dreams. As you breathe in and breathe out. Also, right, I want to invite you to be gentle with yourself, right? This is a messy space, right? As we come into this messy space, let us be gentle with ourselves. Let us take this time to listen. Let us take this time to learn. So as you breathe in and breathe out, right? As we listen, we learn, we can collectively lead. Right? What does that look like? So as you breathe in and breathe out and connect with your body, with your values, with your dreams, with your hopes. I want to gently invite us to feel our feet on the ground, right? Feet on the ground, right? Let us take this time to honor the original stewards of this land, right? The Anishinaabe, the Dakota communities, right? They have various other names and affiliations, but these nations and the stewards of this land and the generations who are here with us, right? Generations of Native communities who are here with us today. Let us honor them as you take a deep breath in and breath out. Let us also take this time to honor the original stewards of the stolen bodies, bodies that were stolen, exposed, victimized, and tortured, exposed to genocide from the continent of Africa. Let's honor them, the generations of the communities who are here with us and their contributions to our betterment. So as you breathe in and breathe out, I'm going to gently invite you to open your eyes, look around, look around, look at the room around, right? Smile, smile. Mo, smile. Yeah. Smile, look around, turn around, turn around, turn around. Acknowledge, right? Let's see each other. Let's see our humanity, right? It is so easy to come here and push papers and policies, right? I want to end this session with just a simple story. A farmer gets up in the morning, at 5 in the morning, gets to his back field and starts to till the soil. And he heard a horse coming from far. And he looks up and he sees his horse riding towards him. And there was a horseman riding on it. And he was thinking like, man, they must be doing something really important. They must be really doing something really important. They're going fast. And he was just tilling and he was looking up and admiring, right, this horse and the horseman coming their direction. And as they got closer, he said, hey, where are you going? You must be doing something important. And the horseman screamed back. He said, I have no idea. Ask the horse. Right? And I just don't want us to be in that space, right? We are not trying to do something rushed. We're trying to do something value anchored, right? Dream centered, right? That generates hope for all of us. Right? Let us stay committed to it. I love y'all. Thank you. Let's sit down. You want to dance? Go ahead.
Okay, y'all, and with that, we're going to get started with our morning keynote. Jonathan McClellan at MJC, and Jonathan doesn't need anyone to speak for him, so I will let him do the talking. Thank y'all.
I'll open with a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, in honor of Black history, a history that I believe should be celebrated every day. 28 days is not long enough. Quote, I believe in liberty for all men, the space to stretch their arms and their souls, the right to breathe and the right to vote, the freedom to choose their friends, enjoy the sunshine, and ride on the railroads, uncursed by color, thinking, dreaming, working as they will in a kingdom of beauty and love. Good morning. My name is Jonathan McClellan, president of the Minnesota Justice Coalition. We are part of a collective of organizations that work with families and community to draft and advance legislation and other policy initiatives at the state capitol here in St. Paul and in Washington, D.C. I want to thank everyone for coming out on this Saturday to spend time in community. We will have a conversation about leadership, the legislative process, and the current work that is being done. Some questions I would like you to consider are, what do you enjoy doing? What are you naturally good at? What makes you unique? What are your natural abilities? I want to acknowledge and thank the University of Florida for this Build Trust literature so that I may share it with you. The ability to influence is an essential leadership skill. To influence is to have an impact on the behaviors, attitudes, opinions, and choices of others. Influence is not to be confused with power or control. It is not about manipulating others to get your way. It's about noticing what motivates and using that knowledge to leverage your performance and positive results. Leaders begin to build trust by establishing their credibility. For foundational elements needed to establish one's credibility include integrity, intent, capabilities, and results. Integrity is being honest. It's walking your talk. Intent has to do with ensurance of your motives are clearly understood. Capabilities are the skills and knowledge necessary to perform your job well. Results are what we accomplish. It's our track record, your ability to get done what you say you will do. Engage others and build a connection. Leadership is not a solo act. If you want to influence others, they have to be involved. Seek input on important decisions that will affect them individually or the team as a whole. Seek to understand the needs, motivations, and values of others. By showing a sincere commitment to what matters to someone else, you'll begin to build greater influence with them as they realize your actions include a genuine concern for their interests. Clarify expectations and practice accountability. To get results, leaders must be able to enlist, persuade, and engage others. However, leaders must clearly delineate expectations, define the results, and clearly communicate them to others. Once the results have been defined, practice accountability. Hold yourself and others accountable to the expectations. When leaders fail to clarify expectations and do not practice accountability, they contribute to and unintentionally create a low trust environment where mediocrity is the norm. This directly impacts your ability to positively influence others. Share your passion. One of the reasons why passion is so important is that it produces energy. It ignites others. There is a contagious quality to passion. Passion is not something that you can fake. It must be real and authentic. It is not enough for a leader to have a vision. They must be able to communicate it and get others excited about it and supporting it. Effective leaders influence others by sharing their enthusiasm and excitement. And last, be open to influence. Influence should be reciprocal. One of the quickest ways to increase your influence with others is to be open to influence yourself. And that is important for when I get into the next phase and talking about the legislation when you're at the Capitol or you're talking to elected leaders or policymakers, being able to understand those key concepts of leadership, especially if you decide to bring people with you on your journey to infect the system. Legislation starts with an idea. Actively introduce yourself to your neighbor. I would like you to actively introduce yourself to your neighbors and come up with an idea for legislation. An example, I want my city to have more funding for potholes. So if you can take 5 minutes to sit over here and talk amongst yourself and try to come up with an idea.
Y'all like that?
So I want you to keep those ideas that you had collectively within your groups, because at the end I'm going to have you share those. Okay? So we're going to start with legislative relationships. Many of you already have legislative relationships. You've worked on campaigns, you've been to people's homes, people have been to your homes who are elected leaders, and if they haven't, it's an opportunity for you to engage that process and that system. Legislative relationships are important because they're a key to get in the door to the legislature when you're down there without having to build relationships from the start. So I want you to keep in mind and think about the relationships and legislative relationships and policy experts and people who are already in those spaces who make those decisions, because those decisions are important, but so are those relationships. And it's an opportunity for you to lean on those relationships. When a legislator comes to your house and asks you for your vote, when you go out and you door knock and you volunteer your time, when your kids, your husbands, your wives, your children volunteer their time, there should be a return on investment, whether it's just a phone call or an ear. But it's not going to avail itself to you until you go out there and take it, or go down there to the Capitol and meet with them, schedule the appointments, and leverage that relationship. When you're down at the Capitol, it's also another opportunity for you to build relationships. If you can get into your legislator and talk to them about your issue, your idea, they'll sit over here and direct you to different people as well for those ideas. And if you look at the booklet, I'll get into that in a second. So some of the staff that are down at the Capitol are LAs, they're called legislative assistants, and CAs, they're called committee assistants. And they have two distinct roles down there. So usually when you're down there, you're going to be seeing a lot of the legislative assistants. Those are the assistants and the gateway to your legislator. They know the schedule, and if you have a good relationship with them, you'll be able to get into your legislator a lot quicker, a lot sooner than you would if you just called them up on the phone and said, hey, I want to see my legislator. And I personally believe, in my experience, that their role is more important down there at the Capitol to getting access than any other place or person out there. The CAs, they're the ones who schedule the hearings. So when a piece of legislation comes and it needs a space for a hearing in a committee, it's your CA that's going to be making that happen, which is why those relationships are important. And if you have the opportunity to build those relationships with the LAs or the CAs, it's just as important as building a relationship with the candidate. Because then you can get a lot more work done working with the LAs and CAs than you can the candidate or the elected official. And the elected official is really busy when they're down there. And the timing that they have to invest in your dreams, your ideas, your issues is very small. And you also have to understand that you're competing against a machine that has been put in place for a very long time. I often refer to it as a buffet, and you want to be the main course, right? So you're competing with the lettuce, the salad, the tomatoes, everything that's out there, and you want to be, that steak with the butter on top and all the garlic, right?
What's the vegan initiative?
Right. they got vegan hamburgers too, right? So it's good to understand that concept and how can you differentiate yourself from everybody else that's going to be down there knowing what you're going to be competing with. Because most of the day, your legislators are either in committee, they're in caucus, or they're in meetings with special interests. And you're trying to get in there as an individual or a small group to be able to push your ideas. Consistency is probably one of the most important things that you can have, is continuously showing up and letting them know that your issues are still important. We have a list of legislation initiatives that we were pushing around criminal justice reform, which I'll get into. But on the media and the news cycles, when the legislators were coming out with their plans, and you heard the governor talking about his legislative initiatives and how they wanted to spend the money and it was as if the past 2.5 years didn't happen. And we have a sustained presence down there, and we made sure that members knew that, hey, these issues that we've been advocating for, protesting about for the past 2.5 years are still important to us. And it's important that they hear that, so the legislators can come out ahead of that and push our policy, the people's policy, irrespective of special interest groups. The revisor's office is another important office that's down there at the legislature. The revisor's office is the person that takes your idea and figures out where it goes in the law. Okay, it just doesn't it just doesn't happen where you're trying to find and you're adding the statute. That has not. It doesn't happen that way. The revisor will get the idea, and then they'll put it in the law, and then they'll work with you to tweak that legislation to make sure that the words that you want and what that piece of legislation does what you want it to do. Because words matter when you say shall, can, should. Those things matter. So you have to make sure that you're doing your due diligence and you're looking over the work. Because oftentimes I have found that when the work comes back, they use those passive words, and those passive words allow for ambiguity in the statute or the proposal of legislation that you're bringing forward. And you want to eliminate all that by ensuring that the words are what you want them to be, and that the piece of policy does what you want it to do. So now we're going to get into the books that I gave you. This is a big version of the Green Book, because the Green Books are usually printed out the end of the month. I tried to get them to bring them here, but they weren't printed yet. So the revisor or the legislative office had these handouts. And what these handouts are is their information for you. This right here, before you even go down to the Capitol, you should know this stuff right here. You should have these books with you. When they come out with the Green Book, you can get yourself a Green Book, which is a condensed version of this that you can carry in your pocket. On the thicker package, you have pictures of the legislators along with all the information of who they are, their children, what school they graduated from, what their committee assignments are. And you want to make sure that you know who you're talking to, so you can tailor your argument based on who they are. Know who they are and what's important to them. Because if I see a legislator who has kids, I know that if I bring forward a policy that involves kids, they're going to be able to relate to some of those things. And I know that I'll take one of my conversations and I will steer it down that vein and try to elicit a response or a natural reaction from the legislator themselves. If they work in a particular field, I do the exact same thing, and I try to figure out where we have more similarities than disagreements or separation, which is another good strategy. The other book that I gave you is committee assignment paper, and those are all the committees that all your current legislators are sitting on right now. So if you have a policy or an idea that deals with police reform, if you have an idea of things of legislation that deals with the courts or funding or agriculture or veterans' rights, these are the committees that you can focus your attention on, because these are the ones that you have to persuade to kick the vote out to get it to the omnibus or the floor. So you want to work within those committees, and also keep in mind that there are some nuances to this as well, because there are individuals who sit on other committees that if you get them, you'll get a lot of other signatures as well on your piece of legislation. So although you don't need to be confined to this list, you want to make sure that the individuals that you're talking to are the people who have a say in or have a vote for your particular piece of legislation, because you can push your legislation, you can push your idea, and have it and already know where it's going to go if it's going to pass before it even gets to committee. So, and the committee is just an opportunity for that jockeying that goes on in committees for them to be persuaded with other voices and community input. So know who your legislators are, and know the committees that those legislators are sitting on, so you can be as effective as you can possibly be. And if you're teaching this to other people down there, or that are going to go down there with you, it's important for them to know this as well. And you can tailor a plan to go do this. The committees, after your legislation gets from the reviser, it's going to be assigned to the committee. A committee, if it's related, like I said, if it's related to the judiciary, it's going to go through the judicial committee. So if it's related to public safety, it's going to go through the public safety committee. And these are committees that are designed to hear public testimony, and this is where the vote happens. This is where all the chips are in that moment for your piece. If it doesn't get out of committee, it's not going to happen. So you want to make sure that when you're ready to go for a committee. And what we do is that we make sure that we have talking points, and our speeches are already written for that. We've already done the research on our policy and our legislative initiatives. We already know where we're going with it once we get into the committee. But the committees get assigned by the speakers, and that's where the number House file, that's where that comes from. Or Senate file, it comes from when you drop it off, which goes into our next topic, is the bill, a jacket. Down at the legislature, your legislative ideas, your bills, they're called jackets. What happens is the reviser formulates a jacket that has a space for signatures from different representatives, and it also has a little synopsis of what the piece of policy is going to do, and it also has the whole bill attached to it. There are two of those jackets, two green ones and two yellow ones. The yellow ones go to the Senate, so if you have a Senate author or somebody in the Senate to carry that legislation, they can take the bill, and if you have somebody in the House that you're going to have carry the legislation, you can have them sign on it in the number 1 slot, and then you'll have co-authors. So you could have a wide variety of signers on your bills, and they really only need one signer to be sent to be bucketed. And once it's bucketed, it gets a number, a House file, a Senate file number, and it moves on to the committees, and that's where the committees get assigned. If there's a particular committee that you want your legislation heard in, you can ask for that, and your representative, who you're moving through, can just put a post-it on that and say, hey, I want this heard in the Judiciary Committee, or I want this heard in Public Safety Committee, or Agriculture Committee, or Consumer Rights Committee. You can have it pushed through the committees that you want it to be pushed for, where you think you're going to have the most success. And they can put that right on the bill and then push that out. And the signatures of those bills, legislators can sign on to the bill before, they can sign on to it after. And once they sign on to it, it bolsters support for that piece of legislation. Oftentimes, I will go down there and get my bills, and I will go to different legislators and I'll explain them. You know, usually get 5 minutes or less to talk to them about the legislation, but usually if it's coming from one side or another, they'll ask you who's carrying the piece of legislation. Okay, and what's the issue about? And then they'll sit over and process that through their minds, considering all the political ramifications that they consider, and they will sign on to the bill, or they'll tell you that I need more information. I need more information doesn't mean that they won't sign on to the bill. And oftentimes, you know, I think rarely do I have legislators say that, but that send me back and say, hey, I need some more information on it. Usually I will go to the next person, and the next person, and the next person, and if I really need that person, then I'll go do some more research. But usually by the time we bring bills forward, we've already done the research. We've already looked at most of the issues that the piece of legislation could have, and we're ready to talk about those bills. So you can go and get and whatever you do in the House of Representatives, you also have to do in the Senate. So if you're talking to everybody in the House, you got all these signatures, the bill is, your policy is rolling, you got committee hearings, and everything's happening the way that it's supposed to. You still have to do it over in the Senate as well. The bill cycle, the bills stay alive for 2 years if you're able to get a committee hearing. And if you're not able to get a committee hearing by the deadlines, then all the bills that haven't had a hearing will die. And you won't be able to do nothing with them for the rest of the year. Until the next year, you can bring back the bills. Right now, a lot of bills that are being heard, we're in a fiscal year, so a lot of bills that deal with money are being heard right now. And then next year, you're going to have a lot of bills that deal with policy that are going to be coming forward next time. And so it's important to know these little nuances, because if you have a bill that has a fiscal note or that costs money, now's the time to get your bill in, because they're considering how they're going to spend the surplus, all the money that's available right now. Next is having your talking points and committee testimony ready to go. And typically we provide a lot of the talking points for the legislators, because the legislators are busy. And when they read the bill, they got the idea, they listened to you, so they support the overall concept of what you're trying to say, but they're not the expert. They're not the expert on your idea, which is why you have to do your homework, and you have to make sure that they have the information necessary on their policy. Oftentimes, I find myself emailing legislators talking points on every bill that they have, so they can logically talk about the bill when they're in committee or when they're in conference, and they're bringing up the bill, or they're in their communities. And you want to be able to have that for them, because then if they look at the package and what you brought forward, you know, it's ready to go. The bills, all the work is done for them, and it makes it a lot easier for them to take this bill than to start something from scratch. So that they're willing to do that with you, and this is what your lobbyists do down there. This is what your special interests do down there, and all city governments have paid lobbyists. So they're down there lobbying and putting all this stuff together for your legislation, and there's no reason why you can't do the same, none. So you want to make sure that you have your talking points and any speeches, a list of all your testifiers. If you have an expert on a particular bill, and they say, hey, I'll testify, write their name down and put their email and their contact information so they can be sent a link, or they'll come down there and testify and support your specific piece of legislation. And that's a lot of that behind the scenes work that needs to be done to push your idea. So the Senate versus House of Representatives, like I said earlier, whatever happens in the House has to happen in the Senate. If it doesn't, if you get all your bill all the way to the floor in the House and you don't do the same on the Senate, your bill's DOA. So you want to make sure that whatever you're doing in the House, you're doing in the Senate as well. The next thing is amendments. So if you get your bill and your policy and you're like, wow, I got like 30 signatures, I got 10 signatures, I've already talked to all these people and I don't want to have the bill rewritten, you can put in for an amendment. You can ask the LA or your representative to put in for an amendment to that bill to change the language of that policy. And you'll also have other representatives who have looked at your bill or your policy trying to offer other amendments as well. And usually when that happens, your representative will call you and say, hey, I got this person who's opposed to it, they got an amendment that's going to change it and basically gut your bill and stuff like that. What is your position on it? What do you think about it? And you tell them, yeah, right. You tell them, no, that happened to us a couple years ago with no-knock warrants. A lot of you know the Amir Locke story, and what a lot of people don't know is that there was a no-knock piece of legislation that we brought forward that passed. But what they didn't tell you is that that bill was watered down. We had a press conference about it, and we told the community that, hey, they amended this bill, they changed it, and that within 8 months, or less than a year, Amir Locke was killed. So that's why it's important to pay attention to these amendments, because you have one side that will project that they're willing to support the issue but they'll gut it, and that's the only way that they're going to support it. So you want to focus on and pay attention to those amendments because they're important. The vote. The next part that kind of comes down to after all testimony is heard is the vote. They're going to take a vote. It's usually a majority, and if it passes, then they'll kick it out to another committee, or they'll put it in the omnibus, or they'll send it to the floor. So those are some options that they have that will happen with your legislation. And that vote, when you get a bill through committee, you're like, yes, and it's a good feeling. But it doesn't mean the fight is over. You have to continue pushing for your legislation, and whatever committee that they're going to send it to, you want to be ready to work just as hard as you did on that first committee, on the second committee. And once you get it through that committee, then you can start to breathe. But remember, everything that you do on the House side, you also have to do on the Senate side. So the omnibus is, each committee has an omnibus side of it, and it's just a conglomerate of bills. When you're heard, they pass it, lay it over and put it in the omnibus. At the end of the year, that omnibus package is like 300 bills, 400 bills, and they all come clumped together, and they go to the House floor, and then all the legislation's heard, and they pass the omnibus package. And then there's standalone bills. Right, lately they've been doing standalone bills at the legislature, where you have one bill, one idea coming through all the way to the House vote, or the floor vote. The floor vote is a vote of all the members. It's when all the House of Representatives is on the floor, and the author of the bill, with their talking points, will sit over here and rep your bill on the floor. I like legislation that's like that, but unfortunately, the omnibus is a real thing, and we lump all this policy into the omnibus. And then after that, if there is a difference in policy or legislation, let's say you go over here to the House and the House amends something or changes something, even a word in it, the same thing needs to happen in the Senate. So if you're able to get your piece of legislation through the House, and you're able to get your legislation through the Senate, you're not done yet if a word changed, because then it goes to conference committee. And in conference committee, it's where they reconcile your policy, your legislative idea, and they try to figure out, well, how do we make these two pieces of legislation? And it's an opportunity. Usually the conference committees are not made up of the individuals who sit up in the chairs of the committees that originally heard your legislation. They're made up of leadership within the legislature, and those consist of, you have House of Representatives, and you have the Senate, and then you have the speakers, and you have usually you can have the governor will usually pay attention to what's going on, but if they get into a stalemate, the governor can step in and use his bully pulpit to try to persuade that policy. So in that conference committee is important because even though your piece of legislation went out, and you're happy with the language, everything can change in conference committee. You could have a completely different version of your legislation than what you thought you were going to have in that conference committee if a letter is changed in the existing bills and they don't match when they get through the floor vote. So you want to pay attention to that way. If your bill is going to a conference committee, you want to know who your conferees are. Your conferees are selected by your speakers and your leadership to represent your bills. Last session, one of our conferee committees was Cedric Fraser. He was in there repping our bills on some things, and then not repping some things on the other. But then you had outside influences that came in and shuck it up. You had the President of the United States tell states that they needed to just pass their budgets and get through their legislation, and then you had the governor come out and say just get me something aside, which sends a message to those conferees. Usually during those negotiations, those are some of the most important times for policy and legislation, because the conferees are listening to while they're negotiating, they're paying attention to what the governor is going to do. If the governor's going to sign it, if he's not going to sign it, if he doesn't care, if he's not willing to put in his political capital or risk political capital for the legislation. And usually when you have a governor that comes out and just says, give me something, I don't care, it sends a message to the other side that, wait a minute, I don't need to be negotiating this because he just wants something. And that can blow up a negotiation. So usually, and that happened actually during our last session for criminal justice reform. And it sent that message, and we weren't able to get any legislation or policy. Actually, we got a lot of bills that support police and make it a crime to defend yourself against police or do anything with them in the mix of what was happening, the uprising of the community, demanding accountability. So this is where the rubber meets the road when it's in those conferences, conference committees, and things like that. The purpose of what Minnesota Justice Coalition is doing, for years, decades, and generations, our communities have not had a voice that other communities, special interests, and lobbyists have had to collectively advance an agenda to address our issues such as race inequality, criminal justice, police reform, restorative justice, the achievement gap, economic empowerment, healthcare, and many more. Our job is to infect the system with a conscience, to create a sustained voice for those who share our values. Another place for you to have impact is also in your local and city government, because they have a process as well, and they have representatives, council members, mayors, and different things like that. One of the successful places that we were able to advocate for change was in Brooklyn Center after the murder of Dante Wright. And they were the first city to pass a robust resolution that called for accountability and gave community control of the police to the community and different reforms for how they were going to respond to traffic stops and so forth. And they're still working on a lot of those issues right now. There's a lot of challenges that are happening right now, given the new leadership that's there, but it was created, and we were able to make change in the local government, which has an immediate impact on all the policy and everything that's happening in your lives right now. And so if you know a representative, such as a council member or a mayor, they can propose ideas for their city just like a state legislator can. So you want to sit over here and tap those resources. Some of the legislation that we drafted was prohibiting qualified immunity, making it so law enforcement loses the taxpayer-funded portion of their pensions if they commit a felony while in uniform or under the color of law, making body camera footage available within 48 hours after a critical incident to the family and or their legal representative, removing the statute of limitations in wrongful death cases, which is currently 2 years, and giving those families who are time barred currently 5 years to bring forward their case. Defining health care. Believe it or not, despite Obamacare and despite all the work that you've seen around the country in healthcare is not defined. And this year we have a real opportunity to define what healthcare is in our legislature, which can create a roadmap and a domino effect for how healthcare is defined around the country. We also have various language that bans no-knocks and adds a provision that considers disability, children, elderly, innocent persons that may be in the home, as well as whether the person being sought is in the home and has been verified that they're in the home. Making it so that if a person who has an expungement, DHS won't be able to permanently deny you a license to work in the medical field. or adopt a child. A lot of people don't know that there's a provision that was passed during the Apolente administration that made it so that if you've ever been convicted of a felony, and this affects 1 in 4 African American males, that you're never able to work in the medical field for life. There is no consideration about rehabilitation, or you can't adopt a child, which is horrific. There's been movement on this from both sides on this particular piece of legislation, and there's a general consensus. In 2019, we had drafted a piece of legislation. We drafted this piece of legislation, and we were able to get unanimous support from Republicans on it. We were able even to get one of the lead Republicans to carry the legislation in the Senate, and then we had one of the lead Democrats carry it in the House. It was a true bipartisan piece of legislation that garnered national our support, and because of COVID in 2019, we had already got it. We was ready to go to the last committee, the Judiciary in the House, and Warren Limmer, who usually doesn't like this kind of legislation and will deny these. He'll deny this kind of legislation on site. He won't give it a hearing or anything. They were actually considering this piece of legislation. And this would have been a big win for our community if we were able to get it passed while we're trying to solve a lot of the challenges with backflow and in the medical space, as well as creating opportunities for individuals to adopt children. So that's a big issue. Anti-doxing of children. A lot of people know what happened, and if you don't know, a young girl by the name of Naya Singh was bullied based on her race. She attempted to commit suicide out in Prior Lake, and it was a big deal. We went and protested the school with the students. We gave the students a voice, hoping that the teachers and administration would hear them, and it came down to we needed to push some type of legislation. We put together a forum where we had half the legislators, congressional members that showed up, and some even spoke, the lieutenant governor, and we came forward with different legislative ideas for policy around the area of anti-doxing of children. Keep in mind, one of the bills that was passed the previous year dealt with police officers and doxing their address. And that's when doxing means when you take an address and you put it out there online. Or you put the information about where a person lives on the internet and share that information. So we passed it for police, but we don't have it for our children, and which gets into the bullying policy. We drafted a bill that deals with strengthening the anti-bullying statute and addressing bullying based on protected class status. 1 in 4 acts of bullying are motivated by race. So we have a piece of legislation that's being championed by Representative Jess Hansen, and that bill, I believe, will pass this session. And it gets rid of a lot of the gray area that's currently existing in schools and doesn't specifically address protected class status of that piece of legislation. There are other bills that we also support and advocate for, and these are bills and that I want to give a shout out to Michelle Gross, because they worked at Communities United Against Police Brutality, worked a lot on these specific bills. Police liability insurance, civilian oversight strengthened, creating an independent investigatory and prosecutory body for police misconduct, ending prosecution for reporting police misconduct, and ending police-only responses to mental health calls, and post board reform. A lot of people don't know what the post board does, but that's the agency that regulates law enforcement licenses. And historically, they hear the issues, but they haven't acted on the issues. So when a law enforcement officer such as Derek Chauvin has multiple interactions with the community that demonstrate his inability to conduct themselves in a professional manner, the post board can yank the license and say, you can't be a law enforcement officer anymore. We're hoping that this session, this year, that we're able to change that, and that has a lot to do with the work that Michelle Gross has worked and others too. And so it's a good day. But the thing with the post board, administrative law is very powerful, and this is an opportunity for us to change the system and get rid of those old tools that have been used historically during for the war on drugs. And we have to refresh those toolboxes and take out policies to do that. I mean, we don't send our military to war with the weapons from World War II. We update and refresh their weapons and give them new things and new ideas, new technology to help them do their important work. And we need to do the same for our law enforcement officers and get rid of some of these old policies that have no sense being in that toolkit that they tend to draw from when working with our community. So I will end with a quote from Pastor Martin, who despite his shortcomings got this right. And despite being about 77 years old, it still has relevance and use today. Quote, "First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I'm not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Infect the system with a conscience." Thank you. Somebody to work on a specific class of legislation. So last year, during the no-knock legislation, Athena Hollins was the representative that was doing all no-knock legislation, and she was the one. But this year, because she's in a leadership position, kicked it out to Byron Curran. So the parties will sometimes say if it involves this vein of legislation, these ideas, we have this person, and your representative will know that, because they go to caucus every day and they say, if you brought this bill, bring it over here to them. So
or sometimes they like new legislators to get bills so that they can kind of pump up those new legislators. So
especially controversial ones.
Yeah, they really don't mind throwing them on the bus.
Right.
I also add to that, your legislators will be strategic if they're invested in the policy that you bring forward. So on that specific example, last year Representative Hollins faced a lot of opposition on no-knock warrants because she has no law enforcement history and she represents closer to the cities. And so her kicking it to Representative Curran was also a strategic choice, because that representative used to be a police officer and represents like White Bear Lake area. And so those are two areas of access that representative can access that Representative Hollins cannot.
Yep. So and that was important for that particular piece of legislation for Byron, to have the police perspective, but also having a police officer repping that particular piece of legislation, to be able to put the when it comes to the politics side of it, it's a lot of show, right? And that's what you'll see on the House floor. So it's important to have individuals who are capable of standing up to that and be able to rep your legislation. Any other questions?
Well, wait, I'm sorry.
Okay.
We're 10 minutes over time, which I love. I love that we're invested, but I want to make sure people have the ability to eat before the next breakout. And Jonathan probably wants sip water or something, I don't know. But this doesn't have to be an isolated lunch. You can continue having these conversations while we eat. So thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah. Time starts now. It's real. The fight's real. Your ideas are real. Our community is real. And sometimes we have to be down there to create a space that has historically been controlled by special interests. And that's the idea of this. This is the idea of empowering you to be the best advocates for your communities, for your families, and it really matters. You had a question?
Yeah, I was curious if you had advice for citizen advocates where you have an idea or some legislation that you think sounds great, and then you get a senator or something to take it to the revisor's office.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, the words shall and should are very different.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of sound the same,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you don't have a legal background.
Right.
So those bills come back, as a citizen advocate, you have an idea of what you wanted, but you get to the bill and you're like, I think this will accomplish it.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we're not lawyers and don't have attorneys, especially in that area of law, because lawyers have different expertise,
Mm-hmm.
what advice do you have to make sure that the bill is actually accomplishing what your community wanted to accomplish?
Right.
You just trust that the senator has your best interest in mind, or is there a place where somebody can parse that for you and go,
Right.
well, actually, this is just saying police should do that. It's not requiring them to do that.
Your best advocate for your policy is you. It's not your senator. You're the expert on that. So my advice to you is to garner and get support. You know people in your close circle that can provide that help. And if you can't get that help, I gave you my business card. So feel free to use that to get clarity on that. But usually when the revisor looks at the legislation and it goes to the representative, they'll ask you, is this what you want? Look at your bill, read what it says, and make sure that it accomplishes what you want it to do, and ask that. Will this accomplish this bill? And you can send an email to the revisor. I want to make sure that this gets accomplished. There is no wiggle room or ambiguity. You say that to them, and then they'll send you back a bill. And if it sounds right to you, and if you have people in your circle that can look at it, can inspect it for you, then have them do that. And then sit over here and say this bill is ready to be jacketed, because usually they'll wait for some type of confirmation from you, your representative will, before they authorize the jacketing of the bill, and that's what it is.
And the registrar, the revisor's office is supposed to be neutral, politically neutral.
Yes.
And you just have to be really clear with them with what you want. And also, one other thing, I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but start really early in the process.
Yes.
The legislature starts usually January, early February, something like that, depending on the year. But we were, like the bills we were wanting, we were working with the revisor's office in July. And the reason is that right before the session starts, they get so far backed up, your bill will never see the light of day if you're not careful.
Right. The bills that I stated in there I had already wrote those bills the year before and the year before. So those are bills that I've written. I did the language, I did all that, and had them sent. I started working on those in October, before the new people were even in office. I was having the bills for the individual House members and the Senate members who were still in office that weren't running, ready to get a new bill, and those went out in December 15th. So the work begins early. Any other questions?
Good question. So I've been at the Capitol probably more than I imagined last year. So I met my senator, met my LA,
Okay.
have an idea with a bill, but I make those connections first so they can see my face, and build those communications.
Right.
So now that I want to present a bill idea, and say I go set up an appointment, present the idea, how often should I continue to follow up with the LA or with my senator after giving them the idea of this particular bill, to give them time to digest it and say, okay, is it good or not, or should I make some changes, or I don't think it'd be good. And even if they do like it and want to run with it, how often should I stay engaged and continue to sort of partnership with them to sort of make sure that it's represented the way that I want to.
Right. Usually I would say in the beginning, once a week, minimum. Once a week. If you have the ability to be down there, like we have a sustained presence down there, so we're always down there. And I will, every day I will go up and check out, I will walk by, the LA and say, how you doing? I'll see the representative and how you doing. So they know that, okay, that consistency component that you typically don't see. You see a lot of people showing up for one day, and that's not enough. You want to have that consistency where you're continuously down there. You can get people to do an email campaign where you're sending an email about it. But in my experience, my 20 years of experience of doing this has been, you have to be there. When you're there, you get a different response than you would if you sent an email. Because then I can go, I might see the person, the representative in the elevator, walking through the tunnel, coming out of committee, going to get their lunch, and there's different spaces at the Capitol where you can interact with all of that. And you can just, if it's been, a week, 5 days or something like that, hey, how you doing? Just let them know. I'm down here, you're working hard, you're doing your stuff. You just want to continuously do that. But once a week when a bill is new, once it gets assigned to a committee, then I would say that, at least once every 8 days, until you know what committee that it's on. You want to continuously put the pressure, and that's what I know that's something that the governor has told me, is that, even though he wants specific legislation, he doesn't always do the right thing, right? Because he's competing with a bunch of other interests that he has to take care of. Keep the pressure on. That's what you're supposed to do. SNCC, I don't know if you're familiar with SNCC. SNCC is an organization that Martin Luther King used to be the head of, and they had a process. The first for justice, the first process was determine whether or not an injustice was done. The second process was to negotiate. The third process was purification. The fourth process was direct action. So the direct action usually is to bring people to the table to negotiate the idea and things like that. And there was an individual who did that during the 60s that a lot of people don't know about. But that movement had that. So if you're down at the Capitol, you are that negotiator. So be the best negotiator. What would you want to see? How often would you want somebody to come talk to you about it? And things, because when you don't talk about it, when I started going down there and started doing the work now and pushing these bills, halls empty, representatives everywhere, and nobody's advocating for these issues, which are important issues. And then you fast forward to where they are now, lobbyists everywhere, special interest groups everywhere, no community members down there lobbying for anything. So we have to create a vein into that space that we haven't been in if we want that change to happen, right? And what you're pushing, you have to believe it yourself to get other people to believe it, which is why that leadership piece that I did in the beginning was important, because you have to believe the ideas that you're going to push on. And that passion is contagious. And if you feel it yourself, they're going to feel it. And if you make them feel it, then they're gonna second guess, their political strategy, because the politicians are considering their next election. They're considering, if I put my name on this piece of legislation, how does it affect the next election? That's what they're thinking about. You're thinking about, if we pass this legislation, my kids will be able to eat. My people will be able to be saved. My community will be able to be protected. That's what you're thinking about. So you have to make those two together for that representative. And if you do that, you'll be successful. Go ahead.
Forgive my ignorance, because I know I have so much to learn still, because it feels like there's, a negative connotation with lobbyists and special interest groups. Is it ever advantageous to get connected with them or find somebody that can advocate for what you're hoping for too, or is it better to just directly as a community member go?
I want to say that it's good to hit them from all angles. Whatever you can do to hit them from every angle that you can, do it. I also sit on the Race and Equity Council for Hennepin County. I'm the chair of the Justice Committee, and I use that position to persuade, the committee to allow the Hennepin County lobbyists to lobby, justice issues. Yeah. And so if you have the opportunity, if someone that was over here behind the scenes talking about this, you want them talking about that. If someone's over here talking about this, you want your issue to be on. The more people that you have talking about it and putting these ideas and letting them know that, hey, these issues are still important. Don't forget about them. It's a benefit. So, any more questions? Go ahead.
So a lot of when I look through this and what people's education are who are serving in the House and Senate, a lot of people don't have a legal background, and I'm wondering how often does a senator or a member of the House of Representatives read a bill or write a bill, or are they relying on the revisor's office too? How does that work?
At the Capitol, they have an independent counsel that will review the bills, and they're independent. They're not Democrats or Republicans or anything. That train of thought doesn't come into the process. Their job is to specifically articulate the bill. One idea of that was when we wrote qualified immunity for the state, and I did all the research on qualified immunity, had some nice stories, had law professors come, like I had it ready to go. They still got the opinion from the independent counsel's office, which for the most part said the exact same things that I did, but it's that authority that the legislators can rely on. And to your question earlier, that's another avenue for you as well, is getting an independent directive from the independent counsel's office, whether you're in the Senate has one and the House has one. So you can say, get an independent and ask the question that you want. Does this do what I want it to do? And you will get that opinion for your piece of legislation.
Can I add on to that too? I will also say, like, a lot of the legislators who being in spaces to like offer a different perspective is helpful, because often they'll turn to their colleagues who have much more of a prosecutorial or like law enforcement perspective on the bill.
Yeah.
That's a great, you know, like for example, some of the bills, like, you know, Travis's law, now I've got a mental health data bill that basically says that if you're a copy, you're gonna respond to a mental health crisis, you're gonna have to do all the same damn paperwork that a crisis team would have to do. So all the cops would have a very big disincentive to do that, right? So those kinds of bills, I'm not gonna take that to just anybody. I've got Jess Hansen on the House side is a licensed clinical social worker. So why wouldn't I take that bill to her, right? So I'm gonna look for those people, and I know on the Senate side, Hoffman is a mental health guy, and Abler, a Republican, is a mental health guy. And so I take those bills to those people, because those are people that will understand those bills better. You know, because everything's not a legal topic, you know, there's other stuff, right? And so I take them to people that I think that have that background to understand that stuff.
But make no mistake that there is a political agenda behind everything that you do. So even if you explain it, you have the best information, and it comes out, if it goes against that political agenda, be prepared for that.
Well, so in relation to that, if you, like you were talking before, if you get things moved through the House, you still have to do everything on the Senate side?
Yes.
So is it my job to find a representative and a senator that will offer both those bills, or do they kind of?
Yeah. So sometimes you can ask the House, the person who you're having hearing in the House, if there's anybody that they work with over on the Senate side. One of my individuals worked with John Hoffman and specifically told me to bring my bill to him. So they'll tell you that, and if you don't know, they'll say that I don't have anybody. Then it's your job to go figure out who your senator is, and then you can go make an appointment with your senator and ask them, would you carry it? If they say, I'll sign on to it, but I won't carry it, then ask them, who do you know that will carry this legislation? Who's doing this work? And they will have that information for you and let you know who you should be bringing in that bill to. I had one of my bills at work. There was a senator there, Claire, that's doing a lot of criminal justice reform legislation, and typically there's been a couple other senators that I've brought my legislation to, but Claire is the one who's pushing a lot of the big criminal justice stuff. And sometimes in the committees
Got something to say. Next Saturday, my man Jonathan come and talk to us about policies, and he's gonna be episode 50. Check us out. Garage coming in, and I got something to say. I think next Saturday, but we're gonna definitely get him in. We need this man. He's a wealth of knowledge. IGSTS.
Thank you. Looking forward to seeing y'all.